Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here, and I have a special guest. Scott McAllister is joining us today. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I'm well, Charlene. How about yourself?
Good, good. Thank you so much for joining us today. And the reason I invited Scott is I wanted to talk about digital transformation and organizational change. And I've known Scott from the time when he was at Comcast and really talking to him and seeing him go through this huge transformation at Comcast Cable in terms of driving that change, but not just the digital part of it, but especially the transformation side of it. So what I'd like to do is to welcome you, and please share with us where you're coming from today, and also what are some of the challenges that you may be facing around organizational change. So Scott, thank you again so much for joining us. I love having the real world application to this. Sure, give us a little bit of an example, a little bit of background. What was your job at Comcast Cable? What was your remit and responsibility?
Sure thing. So my boss at the time, John Williamson, who led digital for Comcast, actually went to the board, and Brian Roberts, the chairman, pitched the opportunity to really expand the digital transformation to a whole different level for the organization. And what I mean by that is they were pretty strong on the marketing funnel, in good shape on e-commerce with some opportunity to improve. But really on the service side, from a digital perspective, they really had not built out the full array of experiences to match up to what they had from a phone experience. So it was a very phone-oriented shop. And the concept was that this was going to be a major transformation for both the customer, but as the company as well, becoming more digitally centric and more efficient at the same time. So my role was actually created out of that pitch. And when it was given the go-ahead to create this digital transformation, I took over the leadership of the digital transformation program that we called Digital First. And the concept being of how can we orient allowing our customers to solve their problems digitally first before having to pick up the phone or go into a retail establishment. So that was the genesis of the role. And in the role, I was responsible for setting the vision and strategy and clearly collaborating with the organization. We'll talk about that quite a bit. Nothing is done in a silo if you really want to truly transform an organization. I was also responsible for taking that forward and operationalizing it, creating the program, the investment, ensuring we're delivering on the things that we had committed to do. As well as ensuring that we not only deliver on the things we committed to do, but on the metrics and the dollars that we had said we would deliver for the organization. So I had a little bit, my hands in a lot of different things, had a lot of partners and collaborators in crime per se, folks that were CX leads or product leads, head of our customer operations, folks from HR. It truly takes a village to make a transformation occur. But my role specifically was leading the digital first transformation for Comcast Cable.
So give me an idea of the scope of this. How many people are you talking about here?
Comcast Cable, 100,000 plus people, probably 125, 130,000 people across the organization. That's including your folks on the phones and texts. And the scale and scope of the organization, we sat in a centralized headquarters organization, digital organization, center of excellence, but there were 3 different geographic divisions led by division presidents that in their own right had P&Ls and ran organizations the size of Fortune 500 companies. So nothing in that organization was going to get done unless you had buy-in and the efforts of the folks in those geographic P&Ls to really push the transformation through. So it was truly a broad whole organization effort to get things done.
So let me get this straight. You not only are taking the way that they do business and completely transforming that, so phone to digital, it's also really big and very complex. So tell me, when you were given this assignment, what did you think? Did you like, yay, this is going to be exciting? This is incredibly daunting. What were your feelings going into this?
This is what I love to do. My professional mission statement is to redefine the way people experience brands through digital. So it lines up with that mission. But I'd be lying if I said there weren't days that were challenging, where you hit roadblocks. I think that people that do this type of work tend to be folks that are very positive, can see the vision and keep their eye on that vision down the road. because not every day is going to be a walk in the park. There are definitely challenges along the way. And I think the other thing that's really critical is it does take a village to make the transformation change. To say that I drove this change for Comcast would be incorrect. It was a true team effort across a lot of senior executives, a lot of mid-level managers, and then frontline employees that embraced the effort and made it happen. So it's a true broad effort across a large organization.
Right. And another question from Tony, just chiming in, just before we get into some of the details. Did you have to do any formal unlearning with people? Did people have to unlearn things that they were doing and do things differently?
I would say it was less unlearning because the digital work was done in a separate space and really owned by the digital organization. It was more of bringing new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things that could sit in concert with the way that they actually did things. So we were adding an and in versus just a replacement. To characterize this as we basically shut down all of our call centers and no longer had retail stores would be incorrect. We created this digital first orientation to really bring us up to speed and where we should be as a world-class organization with our digital experiences. But that then was there as a solution for our customers that they could choose the channel of their choice, whether that be going to digital, picking up the phone, or going into a retail store. And really, what I see as the most exciting type of transformation these days is tethering those different disparate experiences together, because that's the real game changer. Nobody experiences a company in just one channel. They experience them typically through multiple different touch points. And historically, very few companies have done that piece well.
So this isn't about replacing, this is yes and on top of, but it's almost like piling more stuff onto the plate. Let's go into a little bit of detail. You talk about 4 steps, and I'm just going to share your amazing blog. So for those of you who would like to learn more about the details around what Scott did, you can read it on his blog. I just put the URL up there. But you talked about 4 steps that you laid out for organizational change: vision, plan, team, and then a metric to guide all of it. Can you take us through those 4 steps at a high level?
Yeah, so setting the vision, that was the first thing I was asked to do when I came into the organization. Again, that was not just me on my own. That was a group of us in the digital organization, along with Sapient Razorfish, that helped us to envision where it was that we were going to go. And it was interesting. What they shared with us is everyone going through these digital journeys tends to go through a similar type of flow that I've brought up here. They all come to that table in a different way. So we had challenges in the Comcast Cable business with increasing costs from our content deliverers. So the Disney ABCs and the CBS Viacoms raising their prices that were going to put pressure on the P&L. And that was necessitated both from a profit loss perspective, but also from a modernization with our customers, moving that digital experience forward. And the way that we actually set the vision was understanding what was it that we could do to bring things to that next level across the different journeys for our customer set. And then what would it take in the platform to make that happen? And operationally, how did we think about that over the few years? It was a 3-year plan that we had in front of us. And so we did put an operational, and actually I should stop to say, you set that vision and you craft it, but then it was a lot of socializing that with the most senior leaders across the organization, the CEO, the C-suite, the division presidents, getting their input, ensuring that we had hit the nail on the head, per se, with what we felt the right strategy and vision was. And we were able to get that buy-in, which then led us to more of an operational approach of, okay, what does this look like operationally? We had some visionware in the pitch, in the strategic vision, and we had some high level of here's what we're gonna have to build, but now started to think about what do you do in what quarter and what year and what's going to be delivered. And that was critical to them take out to the broader organization. And you mentioned setting up the team piece, and we had so many different forums that were purposefully set up to enable us to really touch all levels of the organization with this change and to feel part of that change. So we had a digital board that was the C-suite and the division presidents. We had a digital operating committee that was down into the AVP, SVP, VP level. And then we had a digital executing group that met every couple weeks. Those first two met every month. The executing group that was more director level and some VPs met every 2 weeks. In that, we used those groups to bring, here's the vision, here's operationally what we're trying to achieve, into those forums. And then they became the ongoing stopping points where we would check in, show what we'd been able to do, raise issues, raise questions, and enable people to filter in so that we could get the buy-in that we needed. We also, very importantly, our the most important stakeholders, were the 3 different divisions. If they operationally were not going to embrace what we were building and build operations that leveraged what we built, we would be unsuccessful. So we actually had what we call digital first leads at the most senior level, as well as at the director level of the organization. And those folks really became the conduit, both out to the organization of and being champions out to the divisions, and then also feeding back in, here are the requirements, here are the things where you're missing, here's where you need to adjust and adapt. The last step, which I think is hypercritical, is creating a North Star metric. We had something called digital first contact share. And we looked on a 90-day period, what percent of our customer set was actually dealing with us only in a digital way. And when we started that journey, that was in the upper 50s. We finished, during my time, 3 years forward, we were almost up to 80% by the time we finished that. And why that was so critical was we could consistently demonstrate, here's how we're performing and here's how we're actually making progress. And as people saw that North Star metric move, initially, I think there was some folks that looked and maybe weren't 100% sure that this was something that was going to be real. There have been a lot of different big corporate initiatives that have come and gone. Some have been successful, some not. And once you started demonstrating some of that success, I think success begets success. People want to be part of that success. And it helped us to bring people along for the journey. And in the end, we were able to drop over $300 million to the bottom line successfully through our transformation. So as mentioned, every day was not easy. There's a lot of pushing the boulder up the hill. I like to say I have a bit of a callus on my head from hitting my head against the wall on an ongoing basis. So you really have to be resilient when you're trying to drive the transformation. And the one other thing that I would share is a lot of people talk about breaking glass. And I have a personal style that's very collaborative and team-oriented. And when you break glass, people get cut and they bleed. People remember getting cut and bleeding. And it's not always a productive thing to do. So in any way that you can find ways for a win-win and to bring people along without having to break the glass, that's a good thing. Because you should only break glass in the case of emergency, not as an ongoing practice for transformation.
Interesting. What I love about what you talked about is that this was a very collaborative process. It wasn't about here's the plan, do it. It was help us build the plan. And what I've heard you talk about here is that it was so important to get that buy-in. And especially they have these digital first leads who weren't necessarily the top people in the organization. I would dare say they were almost acting as evangelists inside the organization. So the places where you couldn't be, there were people there.
Correct.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting things. I really encourage disruptors to create what I call a movement where you're bringing people to this. And you don't do that by breaking glass, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question from Sylvester. I'm just going to push it up here. What is the one huge challenge you encountered while doing the digital transformation? What was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome?
I think it was the early days of getting the buy-in. I mean, what I described is nicely packaged the way that you hear it, but it was a lot of work to get people to come along. And I'll share a story that when I knew we had actually, let's say, hit a point where we were going to move to a level of, I thought we were going to be on the road to success. Because it took us, the first 6 months were pretty bumpy. We had pushback. The metrics weren't moving yet. And there was a meeting that was the more of the ongoing, let's call it the director level folks. And my program lead for the whole program came back to me and she was frustrated. She felt that the transformation that was going on, that the teams out in the divisions were taking over and building the adoption plans for the customers and for the frontline reps. And my question to her was, well, are they following our advice and the way that we kind of laid out our recommendations and just taking them to the next level? And she said, yes. I said, we've won. They actually believe this is their work now. This is actually exactly what we wanted to have happen. It's they're taking the ball and taking it forward and running with it, which you're not going to get that transformation from having one person or even just one team driving the change. It has to get embedded into the organization. And to say that there weren't challenges along the way after that would be incorrect. We had challenges both where we had big wins and we had issues that came along the way. But I think that initial getting over the hump with people where they started to see it as their transformation as well, and it could impact their metrics in a positive way and wanted to be part of the team and seen as part of the team, that was transformational. That was when things really started to happen for us and the metrics started to move and we really started to progress.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about your approach to digital transformation, and I don't see many companies doing this, is that you're a really strong technologist, but you're so focused on the people part, the transformation part of the digital transformation. But the exacting process and focus on the metric, it was unrelenting from what I could see. And so that I saw that when I was working with Comcast, and that was just really impressive. I love how the dashboards, everything was about the digital first percentages. So just fantastic for that.
Yeah, and an anecdote to that, we had on our floor on the digital team, we had screens that put metrics. And honestly, I can't take credit for that. John Williamson, who was my boss and led digital at Comcast for over 8 years, was so passionate about the delivery of metrics and performance. And so we had it on our own screens, but we also put it on the screen. We had a screen put into our CEO's office and actually had it placed behind his head in his office. So it was always there. And every single meeting that we had, I mentioned all these forums, we were always referring to that metric at all times. And we managed also, and importantly, we were able to get that as a bonus kicking metric our first year. So the entire organization's bonus could get a kicker based on their performance. And we were able to actually achieve our objective on the customer experience side for the kicker. And it was the first time in 3 years that the kicker had actually been enacted. So that was another success begets success. People are focused on the metric. We are successful. You get a bonus kicker. You're that much more invested over time.
Let me go back to that, because this is a key thing that I don't see many organizations do. Here's an important thing. Here's a metric on your dashboard, but it's not going to impact your compensation. How and when did that bonus kicker, how did that evolve? How did that come to fruition? Because I rarely hear this in organizations.
Well, we asked for it early on. I would say that Dave Watson, our CEO, was incredibly invested in the work that we were doing. He was committing his time every month for an hour. When he was out talking to different parts of the organization, he was talking about the importance of digital first and how it would transform the company and how critical it was. And he put his money where his mouth was, quite frankly. So I think that underscores another really important process of transformation. If senior leadership isn't behind what you're doing, you will have a very hard time driving that transformation. It's really critical to have that buy-in. So whether you have to create that buy-in, or in my situation, I came in where the buy-in was already created, it is so critical to the success because it creates amplification of your message at that most senior level. And if your boss is telling you this is something that's important and I'm going to pay you against it, and this is the boss of everyone in the entire company, that goes a long way to really getting people focused on the effort.
I want to draw a differentiation between support and support with quotes and true meaningful support, like you're going to put money against it. I see so many senior executives get on their quarterly calls, wave the flag of digital transformations. Yes, we're into this. And they go back and nothing has changed, or they don't talk about it at that meaningful level. How did you ensure that the executives really, truly were behind it, and also that the rest of the organization really, truly felt it? Was it just that, or was it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that if you listen to the cadence we set for the meetings, like every single month, these senior executives were hearing about what was going on in detail, right? We were talking about how we were performing. we're highlighting wins, we're talking about challenges, we're elevating challenges, and we're doing that at all levels of the organization. I didn't even mention one of the other things that we did was not only at the senior level and mid-level executive management and middle management, but frontline employees. We had, whether it be going out and having tchotchkes handed out around Digital First, or recording videos of myself and John Williamson and other leaders across the organization talking about Digital First, making sure that it was just constantly brought front of mind. And one of the things I was most proud of is if I ever had an issue that I couldn't solve digitally and had to get on the phone and talk to a rep, I actually would ask them, I'd say, hey, I work for Comcast. And I say, do you know what Digital First is? And to a person, they each, when I had the issues, and there were very few I had to call on, but when I did, they'd say, yeah, I know what that is. Well, that's what I do for a living. So it was, you knew if it was making it to the front line that we were doing something right. We also, I mentioned how critical the division presidents were. They own the P&Ls. And we actually traveled out, and this is, again, something that my boss had done before Digital First, but every quarter he'd go out to the field. And you would assume every one of the headquarters organizations did that and spent that time, but they didn't. And this was something that John always did. And we did that for Digital First, and always were out there to speak to the division presidents on their turf with their people. And that shows an investment to make that trip to Boston, make that trip to Atlanta, make that trip to Denver, and to take the time with the team, because many just didn't make that investment. So I think it's a two-way street of demonstrating the commitment to the rest of the organization as much as asking for the commitment from the organization to drive the transformation.
This is great details. I want to talk a little bit about how you communicate. You talked about these forums to connect the leaders, and you talked about the importance of having a communication plan so that everybody, even the front lines, have it. You also talked in your blog post about communicating with customers, which I had never seen before, about the importance of digital transformation and bringing customers into the fold. Can you talk about what that communication plan looked like?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, build it and they will come is something that is a bad assessment, right? You have to let people know that things are coming. So we had plans against operationally, as I mentioned, we knew what we were going to build when, and that then had plans to integrate in with our frontline reps so they understood it was coming. But as important was to communicate to the customers themselves. And I'll give you a perfect example. Moving for our customer set at Comcast was very important, meaning from residence to residence, whether it be apartment to apartment or house to house. A good chunk of people every year pick up and move. And that is a jump ball for the organization. And you could end up losing that customer. And it's always easier to keep an existing customer versus having to get a new customer. And when we started, we did not have a digital move experience. Zero, none. There was not such a thing. And we worked hard to build that out. We had to about 80% of the use cases about a year in, and felt comfortable like, okay, we've now done this. And we started talking with the organization about all the different touch points in the organization, but most importantly, outside the organization. And the real culmination, anybody that's in a Comcast market and has seen the Amy Poehler ad with the moving truck and the two guys on the moving truck, there was one the year before that actually was the first time that we talked about above the line digital and moves, and talked about being able to move in as little as 2 clicks in less than a minute. And everybody was seeing that then out, your customer set is seeing that digital transformation being talked about in above the line media, and then all levels of media. But you know, if you're doing it in above the line media, the organization believes in it, because that is a mass media effort that's talking to everybody and is incredibly expensive. And there's huge opportunity costs of what I talk about in those 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And that really, to me, shows the commitment of the organization to pushing and helping our customers understand the transformation. And we massively moved and shifted people online out of actually picking up the phone and calling for a move through that process.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic example. So thank you for sharing that. I have one other question here from Priyo. How did you figure out balancing the workload of the existing work that they had to do, the regular day job, and then on top of that, enabling digital first? This is always the issue with digital transformation projects, where it's just being piled onto everything else that everyone's doing.
Yeah. So within the digital organization, it was clearly critical. Like my organization, that was our job. I had 40 plus people that's what they did for a living. And my digital partners, like so much of what we did was this is what's feeding things. But Prio, and hello Prio. I know Prio from my MX days. The fundamental challenge for these folks that are out in the organization, especially the digital first leads, they probably took the biggest amount of effort on. But remember, if we go back to saying this was something that was actually a bonus kicker in the organization, it was a focal point for the organization. And in many cases, I had a guy, gentleman, Tom Karenchak, is one of the best professionals I've ever worked with, that ran the customer service organization. And Tom had aligned goals where, though he ran the call centers, his job was to get calls out of the call center. He recognized a partnership with the digital organization would help him to do that. And there were levers he had in his own organization as well, but he identified people in his own organization to put against this digital transformation effort and to actually have people focused. And so what I would say is, in many cases, this became a good chunk of someone's role. It was not a here's 100% of your role and add some on. It was this is going to be your focus. And in many cases, we took, especially the director level leads out in the organization, in many cases for digital first that were in the divisions, that was their full-time job to focus there. Not for all of them, but for some of them, that was what they focused on. But I think this all comes back to, have you built the experience, the support in a way such that it's going to percolate down the importance, so people actually expend the resources to put behind the transformation. And I would argue, we go back to the break glass in case of emergency. Don't just break glass. Folks that just break glass rarely are able to bring on board the resources from other parts of the organization, because they're kind of being told, oh, you don't know what you're doing. We're smarter. We're just going to go do it. And then it's very hard to bring the organization along. And that was not the tenor of what we did. The tenor of what we did was, you have an expertise in an organization. And keep in mind, Comcast is an incredibly successful organization. At the time was incredibly successful and was delivering for the street every single quarter, and the stock price was going up. So we were not in a crisis. This was not a situation like Delta, who was one of Sapient Razorfish's folks that they worked with, that was in bankruptcy. So we didn't have something to point to say absolute crises. But we did have the support at the senior level, and it was important enough for us to make the objectives that we needed to make for our P&L to bring the organization along.
Yeah, so without that burning platform, you need that executive support to galvanize and focus people on that one thing. As we're closing up, I want to ask your advice. What advice would you give to all the people who are watching this thinking they want to go and disrupt, they want to create digital transformation? What advice would you give to them?
I've written a lot about this in my blog purposely because I want to share the things that I've learned. And some of those things I think I've learned over my 20 plus year career in the digital space with big companies like Dell and American Express and Time Inc. and most recently with Comcast. Some of those I learned through this particular process. But I do think that there is this structure that you can leverage and follow of setting that vision and operations. Most importantly, assembling this cross-functional team so that you actually are creating an effort that is aligned with the organization, and others are going to help you to push things forward. And most importantly, having some way to be able to measure, are we successful or are we not successful? Because that will help people get more behind your effort if you're demonstrating the success. People like to be part of that success. And the last one, I've said it multiple times, but I think it's really critical for transformation agents to bring people along with them, not to get out in front. Because if you're out in front, you look behind you and people are 10, 15 yards behind, you're not going to be able to push things through. If everybody's running arm in arm, or rowing, the better would be to row the oars all together versus one person rowing one direction and 5 going the other. It's amazing the output that you can get.
And just one other perspective, I'd like to just have the audience share. What was the time from this? What the time frame? Was it a few months? Was it years? Because I think sometimes people think, I've got to get this done within the next quarter. This was not.
It was a 3-year journey. It was a 3-year journey. I think when you come in and you start the process, it's critical to identify some quick wins that you can start impacting. And we started focusing on billing immediately. We have built out a lot of the infrastructure for billing digitally. Meaning paying everybody every month is going to pay a bill. So it was a place that we could start to move the metrics. So we didn't have just digital first contact share. We had other things that we would look at, getting people signed up for auto pay, moving the digital payments, and we could demonstrate some movement. So having a way to demonstrate early wins, so you start engendering the support that you're going to want, and again, that people see it successful. But this was a 3-year process, a 3-year journey, and it really took us that first year to really get the momentum and get it going. In year 2, we were really moving. In year 3, the momentum just continued forward for our transformation.
Great. Scott, thank you so much again for sharing your wisdom and expertise. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, Charlene.
Right. And thank you everyone for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Feel free to learn more about it we have lots of different events and things. So you can come to charlenelee.com/events and see more of those. And also join the community that Scott and I are part of called Quantum Networks. It's a place for disruptors to come and be able to connect with each other. Thank you all, and all the best with your journey. Have a great day.